Chapter 6, Lost Sheep. Meeting time? Whoa, meeting time. Hello, everybody.
So that's what happened to you before you ended up here. I hadn't realized it was quite like that.
The start of our secret meeting at Quill's place involved me giving everyone the full details of what happened in the lead up to my eventual arrival in Nisa. I'd given Quill an overview, but early on it had been difficult to talk about the details, and he hadn't pressed me for them. He knew about Endgame and the chase in the rain. I had never mentioned Rory to him until today, though.
My concern is that your descriptions of how you met Rory and what happened later don't sound like Arensol poisoning.
Ripley definitely found it in his system, though. Trace quantities maybe, but it was there.
But a trace quantity means exposure would have been quite a while ago, long before Morgan met him.
I hadn't expected to see Eretz and Neil again so soon, but Locke had called them to come over as well, since they were the ones that had taken Rory to the clinic. Okay, so Neil's around too. I was hesitant to share my experience with people I barely knew. That's what I was thinking when I saw Eretz, but Quill and Locke trusted them. But there was a lot that was unusual about the situation. I was, for better or worse, involved, and in more than a tangential way, if Rory had come here because of me. So the details were necessary.
Rory's behavior may not match the symptoms of Arensol exposure, but Locke, remember that our knowledge is still pretty limited. And we have no idea who exposed him, how he was exposed, to how much he was exposed, or anything else that might influence his symptoms.
I think I know who exposed him, but Morgan doesn't.
We're familiar with a tiny selection of case studies involving accidental and minor exposure.
We also can't say what else he might have been through. If he took something else alongside the Arensol, we have no way of knowing what those side effects would have been like.
Ripley did say there weren't any other substances in his system, but not everything stays in the system the same amount of time. And he had very high Forex system activity, too.
I can't say one way or the other, since I don't know much about Arensol in the first place. I can only say how he was acting when I met him.
You said the first time you met him there were no signs of fade, right?
Not at first, no. Well, not the hair. One of his eyes is significantly lighter than the other. That can be the result of fade. Why?
Arensol exposure can cause fade symptoms.
Maybe, but something happened to him between our first and second meeting. Something that wasn't Arensol related if Ripley thinks exposure was quite a while ago. Because when I encountered him the first time, there was no fade. And the next day, his hair had gone white. His eyes were strange, and his behavior had degraded significantly.
It's unfortunate we can't get more information from him. And maybe not for a while, now that Ripley's keeping him sedated.
We'll have time to ask him questions when he recovers. I doubt we want to interrogate someone in his condition.
And hopefully he has answers for us. It's obvious we don't have all the pieces to this puzzle. If he was exposed to Arensol a while ago, then what happened to him between then and when Morgan met him? And how much of what she witnessed is because of something other than Arensol exposure?
I settled back against the sofa, drawing my knees up as I stared outside at the view, chewing the inside of my cheek. I know I'm still a bit of an outsider, but what does Arensol exposure do? Quill let out a quiet scoff.
There's literally no way any of us can call you an outsider, given your involvement at this point, Morgan.
I'm glad to hear that, because I have to ask, what exactly is Arensol? What does it do? Given everything you've said so far, it has some effect on psi ability or the Forex system, right? Locke and Quill shared a quick look, and for a split second I wasn't sure they'd share anything, but Quill leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and started to speak.
Yes, it affects Psi and the Forex system. In multiple ways, as far as we can tell. Research has been limited, though. At least here in Nisa it has been. Arnsol was discovered by accident a few years after they discovered Arcalium here. It's a byproduct of processing the ore.
That's where I read Arnsol before. You told me Arcalium is a component of the Imidrium alloy, and that it's the component that reacts to Psi.
Correct. As you're aware, Nisa's research is in public. Some of it gets released to Aurelie and can be published under other groups, but the bulk of it stays in Nisa. Especially something like a compound that can affect psionic ability. As far as we are aware, the deposit under Nisa is the only known source of Arcalium, which makes Nisa the only source of Arnsol. If people on the outside are being exposed to it, there are only two options. Another source has been found.
Or someone leaked it to the outside.
Exactly.
The more important thing here is that we don't actually know much about what Arnsol is capable of, but we do know its effects can be profound.
If it was discovered here, why don't you have more information? Haven't you been researching it?
Research is limited due to ethical concerns, of course.
Back when it was first discovered, no one was aware it could affect Espers at all, Morgan. Research was on Arcalium, not its byproducts.
At that time, the Esper population was much smaller here in Nisa. There were only a few Espers even in the research community. But there were some. They and a few augments were directly interacting with the research materials as they explored how and why Arcalium reacts the way it does to Psi signatures.
Which means they would have been exposed directly to the Arnsol without knowing what it could do.
Yes. And though neo-human brain structure isn't conducive to the organic nuclei clusters that make up the Forix system in the first place, that isn't the case for everyone else.
So the Espers and augments had some sort of reaction to the Arnsol.
Unfortunately, yes. Negative ones. But it wasn't linked to the Arnsol until much later. And not until some damage had already been done.
Multiple of them experienced Esper power surges. In one case, it led to a near-instant burnout. Some augments were left with full-fledged Psi abilities in the aftermath of exposure.
So they awakened as Espers after exposure?
Yes. It can affect people that dramatically. You can see why research is so limited. We weren't, and aren't, sure what all it can do. We can't test it on people ethically, of course.
So it's not being researched at all anymore?
Our teams are still studying it, but in a more limited way. Nothing like testing on humans, not even microdosing. Some early exposures suggest that it can have permanent effects even in small quantities.
The first cases, which were accidental, have been studied in detail, and the data is still being studied. With that data, they've built computer models to predict Arnsol's effects on human biology, which of course also has its limitations.
So Nisa isn't researching Arnsol outside of computer models, but it's somehow leaked to the outside and... what? What's the hypothesis here? Rory was a lab worker for whoever got their hands on it?
Or a test subject.
That sort of research would be illegal. Most Esper research is, certainly anything that would involve experimenting on people. Even what little research you've done in Nisa would run into mountains of red tape in New Albion or anywhere else.
So you can see our concerns, can't you?
They thought Rory was a test subject? Of human experimentation? I assume we wouldn't be having a secret meeting if you knew how Arnsol was leaked and to whom.
No, we don't. We've been hunting leads and rabbit trails for almost 5 years now.
Did anybody arrive around that time period? 5 years?
Quill was the first to conclude it had leaked.
I tried to investigate it on my own for a while, but it was impossible to make any headway.
Is that why you've been in contact with that quote-unquote detective to try to find out where the Arnsol is being leaked? Reuben would have a lot more ability to do some legwork on that.
You have Nisa's research center, but there's also Stratum. They don't have direct access to Arnsol, but there are so many connecting points between the two that we can't rule out someone in their ranks. The fact it's covered up so well could mean multiple people. including at pretty high levels. I eventually told Locke about the situation because he felt like the only person I could trust.
And bringing Vale in was natural as well. They have some first-hand experience with people on the outside that target Espers.
There are plenty of rumors about unsavory projects involving Espers and human research. People think it's mostly in Delphine, but it would be nice if that was the case.
Just in case, we need a refresher. Nix. Yep.
The group I had a run-in with was in the Triad, and that's how I ended up here.
Oh, was Nix after you too, Vale?
I got dragged into the whole thing when a few stragglers came through intake and Genoa while showing unusual symptoms. To the public, it was just psi fatigue. Privately, it was identified as aerosol exposure.
And Ripley?
Ripley's on the fringes. I think she knows something is going on, but we try to not share much. For her safety, too.
Eretz and I were only on the fringes until today, so we weren't aware of Ripley until we took Rory to our clinic.
It seemed almost like a little conspiracy, didn't it? Is this the only research that's been leaked?
Let's just say it's what we're most worried about because the implications are far-reaching. I have a contact on the outside I've been working with for a couple of years now, and he's helped identify numerous cases, hidden projects, incidents, all of which could imply some kind of Arcalis involvement. Though it's clear not all the illicit Esper research out there involves Arcalis, some projects and cases seem pretty suspicious. Still, without knowing the source, or sources, of the leak, it's hard to do anything. We can't shut down that branch of the research department for no reason. And publicizing the leak with only vague evidence could cause other issues.
How do you know there's not another source of Arcalis somewhere? Nisa might not be the only place that's discovered it.
Well, we don't. But there's evidence that suggests Nisa is involved and that the first cases were connected to us. Since we haven't found the leak, we have to assume it's still happening, even if it's only small quantities of unrefined Arcalis or raw Arcalium.
Who's this contact of yours on the outside, then?
Well, we don't share a lot of private information with each other. Back when I was still on my own, I stumbled on a public case that seemed to align to the symptoms of Arcalis contamination. Researching that case is how I ended up making contact with Rob. He's an interesting guy, sort of obsessed with conspiracies, secret projects, unsolved Esper-related cases. Kind of a weird hobby, I guess.
I'm not convinced Rob is not Reuben, but go on. A convenient one if it's helped you in any capacity with your investigation.
He's helped connect the dots on the outside, but that's not enough to trace Arcalis back to a specific source on the inside. It lets us know how widespread it might be. I guess if he could find and question an outside contact, that might help, but that's a shot in the dark. He's traced the first relatively solid appearance to Delphine, we think. But it's not too much a jump to assume it may have appeared in the Triad around the same time, and we just aren't aware of it. Delphine has a lot more factions, which means a lot more people can leave a trail of breadcrumbs.
A trail of breadcrumbs? Where have I heard that before? Conspiracy theories were not my strong suit. I never gave much credence to them in the past, though you couldn't go without hearing the odd one or two. Especially not in my line of study, where they had a tendency to proliferate. But this was something else. Human experimentation. I suppose we won't know anything for sure until Rory can answer questions, but if he's been through what you think he has, we can't be sure he'll be able to give us information.
I don't just think he has. I know it. I just have that feeling. A lot of isolated Espers from the infantry class get roped into things like that if they aren't recruited by Endgame. And if you're a ranked category like us, even more likely. They can be pretty insidious. Sometimes they look like groups that want to help, support groups, or hidden Esper communities. And then you realize that was a front to get some research material. It might have been your fate if you hadn't made it here.
That was horrifying. Has happened in some bad ends. Still, as much as we need answers from Rory, I think the most important thing is his well-being. He looked like he was in terrible shape. I don't think we should subject him to any interrogations until he's recovered, especially if Vale is right.
I'm in full agreement there. It may mean our answers take a little longer, if he has any for us to begin with, but I'm willing to wait. Based on what you've all told me, he's at least as bad as Morgan was when I found her. I may have sprung some hard questions on her a little too soon. I don't want a repeat of that.
I'm not so sure comparing Rory to me is accurate. I had a bad day. Rory seems like he may have had a lot more than that.
I'll be there when Ripley wakes him for the first time, just in case. I thought that maybe I'd bring him to stay with me until we figure out where he's from, what's going on with him.
Good on you, Vale.
Given where he's come from, he might recover better and feel more comfortable in a home environment anyway.
Are you sure that's wise?
It's wise if you want to question him off the record, and keep anyone else from noticing him. Without knowing who's behind this, we can't be sure they aren't keeping an eye out for people like Rory. Keeping him off the record might be best. So far, the others have done okay here. We check in on them sometimes.
Rory's in a lot worse shape. I want to keep him where we can take care of him. I can only imagine what the poor kid has gone through.
Besides, I have a lot of other things I want to ask him, such as if he followed Morgan here, and how or why he did.
Girl, why are you blushing at that? Girl? Morgan? Morgan? Honey? Girl? What you doing? What you doing down there in the corner?
I guess after this, I'll be going through surveillance around the checkpoints to see if we can catch where he came in from and how he was behaving.
I'll help with that. It'll be much faster for me to scan the systems than you. And I can take a peek in Arelli, too, to see if he was spotted there.
Of course. I know you're an expert at poking into systems where you're not technically allowed.
Oh, come on. These days I only do it when you ask me to.
This was so much to take in, but at least it wasn't the first time they were dealing with something like this. I wondered how many people had shown up here with Arensol exposure. And I wondered how I was connected to all this. Rory had been exposed to Arensol in the past. Then he and I encountered each other in New Albion by chance? He hadn't seemed like he had been deliberately following me like the others. Endgame, unknown groups, Crimson, that woman with the strange eyes. What is the connection with the eyes? And now Rory had shown up here too, the place that was the source of a material that might have been used to experiment on him. Like coming full circle.
Everything okay, Morgan?
I'm okay. Just trying to put all the pieces together.
Join the club.
I guess I'll check in with Ripley. She was having a fit over the prospect of keeping Rory overnight. She said she'd make an exception if she has to, but she's not happy about it. I guess we should try to put him in the system as another random migrant for now. If anyone asks, we can justify moving him here because he knows you, Morgan.
I'll handle the documentation for that. It shouldn't be a problem on our end. Have Ripley make sure the medical report only mentions the fatigue issues.
I will. Vale and I will probably head back over there, since it seems like we're done here for now. Morgan, if it's not too much, can you record everything that happened to you? Even the minor details, even if you don't think it's important. I suspect it'll be helpful to have a complete record of how you and Rory crossed paths.
Of course.
Looks like everyone has their homework. Sorry to get you involved in one of our internal issues, Morgan.
Unfortunately, it looks like I was involved before I got here. I'm just relieved it doesn't seem like I got you involved in my issue.
We'll be in touch to let you know what the plan is for Rory overnight.
And that was how we ended our little gathering. Eretz and Neil left to ostensibly finish their date, promising they'd look into the surveillance system tomorrow. That was a heck of a break from that date. Vale and Locke went to Ripley's clinic to check on Rory and make arrangements for his release, if it was possible. Quill and I were left alone again. It's been a while since we've been alone with Quill, actually. For a while, we sat rehashing everything we'd already talked about. I even drew a diagram to visualize all the connecting points between me, Rory, Nisa, Arensal, and other potential groups. We just need some red string. Quill finally got up and went to make dinner. I sat a while longer staring at my diagram and trying to make sense of it, if there was any sense to be found. Was I forgetting things? Events were scattered through little bubbles, but what if I was missing connecting points? I tried to channel my inner conspiracy theorist, but she wasn't cooperating. After a few minutes, I got up to join Quill in the kitchen.
Oh, I didn't expect the day to take this kind of turn.
I'm so sorry. You already had a stressful morning, and now this.
What are you apologizing for?
If I wasn't here, Rory might not be either, and you'd be having a better day?
What kind of logic is that?
I don't know. I'm tired.
This Arensal thing has been going on for years before you even showed up. If anything, you got pulled in because we couldn't keep a lid on our research center.
I wasn't sure what else to say. I felt bad. And at this point, we discussed it, rehashed it, and there wasn't much else we could do besides go in circles if we kept talking about it. Until Rory was awake and recovered, there was unlikely anything else we could find out about the situation. I took a breath and walked around the bench top, determined to change the subject. Okay, let's discuss something else then.
Sure. What fascinating topic do you have in mind? More bizarre observations about neo-humans? The Trinari structure? Something else?
I was going to ask about the vote and debate today. Based on what little I heard, it must have been quite heated. He lifted an eyebrow, and I half expected him to complain. But no, he pushed a chopping block with tomatoes toward me to allow me to take over as he turned back to his cooktop. He's letting us help.
Heated is a good way to describe it. Vic wouldn't let up on it even when it was clear he was fighting a losing battle. And even if the vote failed today, I doubt the topic is laid to rest. Not with it a part of the public discourse now.
He shrugged. Why is he so determined to do this despite what anyone else wants? The city seems to be doing fine as it is.
Who knows? Sometimes people decide they know what's best and they can't let it go. They convince themselves there's some untapped potential they can help everyone realize. And the reality is, plenty of people don't want to live in the shadows anymore. That's part of the platform he's built up around this idea. Some of us are more cautious about Nisa's eventual step away from secrecy. Others want to take a more bold approach. I disagree with it, but I won't call it invalid. Just unwise.
I can understand that to a degree. Hiding is exhausting and frustrating. But coming out of hiding can have a lot of unforeseen results. I know that better than anyone.
I'd hope it wouldn't be quite the same as what you experienced. I don't think our roads are built for high-speed car chases. But you're right, of course. There's a lot you can't foresee when it comes to this sort of thing. Vic refuses to see it. Hell, even this Arensal thing is a good reason to not go public. Can you imagine if someone tied illegal human experimentation to a city run by neo-humans?
That does seem like it would create a bit of a firestorm. But the implications of Arensal going public would still be huge even if the illegal human experimentation aspect stayed in the shadows. Something like that would place Nisa at the forefront of global politics. If it wasn't already there, just based on who the population is. Negative side effects aside, it can awaken Psi and non-Espers. That's significant.
Exactly. And everyone will want this place to be a chess piece because of what we mean for the planet.
I hope Vic can see that somehow.
We can only take all that as it comes. Just like the Rory situation. And now it's your turn. Before everything took a turn, how was your day? How did your calls go? It would be nice if there was one good thing that happened today.
Oh, that's right. I had forgotten about those. They went well, I think. David was keen to get his hands on the report from Dione, the one I mentioned about the structure there. He wants to put me in touch with some of the people who are in the city right now, too. So I have that to look forward to as well.
David always comes through.
Aw, so do you. The way he looked off to the side like, he. So do you. I have no idea what I'd have done here without you, Quill.
Well, I'd like to say I don't either. But knowing you, you'd find a way. Even if it meant charming someone else into helping you.
Oh, so I charmed you into helping. It wasn't just out of the goodness of your heart. He smirked at me as he leaned across the countertop.
I told you already I wasn't being altruistic. But yes, at first I was just helping because I wanted to. Because you needed it. No offense, but no one is charming when they're having a gushy nosebleed in an alley.
Fair.
You didn't charm me into helping, but you could say you charmed me into letting you stay. Granted, after your insistence that I snore, I strongly reconsidered.
You did not.
I most certainly did.
Quill, who was now leaning against the bench next to me, reached over to run the back of his fingers across the top of my hand, causing my gaze to travel there. Yes?
But it was worth it to let you stay.
When I looked back up at him, he had a smile on his face that felt very unlike him. Doll. Oh?
That's just on my end, though. I know why I wanted you to be here, but I don't know if that's why you chose to remain. Whatever your reasoning is, it's fine, though. I don't have any particular expectations.
He flicked the end of my nose. Thanks. And turned away to finish slicing mushrooms before dropping them in a flat pan to saute them. I stared at his back, my heart flip-flopping uncontrollably. Where did that come from? Quill glanced back over his shoulder with a smirk, and I'd almost believed he was only teasing if not for the slight softness in the smile.
Like I said, you can be pretty charming when you want.
I wasn't even sure how to respond to him, and he went back to cooking without waiting for me to. Why I had stayed at his place? I couldn't even say. I had nowhere else to go? Though he had told me there was public housing for newcomers, so technically I did. But his place was comfortable. He was comfortable. Maybe I just wanted to cling onto someone kind. I wasn't sure. But now I couldn't imagine myself anywhere else. I wasn't sure whether that was bad or good.
Anyway, I'm glad things are going well on that front. I know you felt a little lost for a while. Not without reason, of course, but it's good if you're starting to find opportunities here.
I agree. Though it's hard to let go of the fear I might pick another path only to lose it again.
That's a possibility everyone has to deal with every day. But we can't just hold back. You have to move forward and hope for the best.
I know. For a while after that, the conversation turned to cooking and dinner as Quill spent the next half hour bossing me around and making me do small tasks around the kitchen. It felt like there was so much to discuss, yet we talked about everything we could. If we continued, we'd be going in circles. At this point, there would be a lot of waiting. Waiting to hear if Rory was able to leave Ripley's place, to hear if he'd awakened. Waiting for Quill to contact this Rob person on the outside, and then to hear back. Waiting for Eretz and Neil to look at the footage to see if Rory's path into Nisa could be tracked. Waiting for David to put me in touch with his team here, and for my application for residency to go through. I'd been in limbo for so long that I'd almost become used to it, and now everything was shooting around at light speed only to grind to an abrupt halt with the closing of the day. And I kept thinking back to the conversation with Vale a few days ago about how and why I'd ended up here. Perhaps I'd come here because it was safe, or maybe it was because there was already a thin line that had tied me to Nisa, even to Quill. Perhaps I was only following that. I wasn't sure anymore. Oliver always used to say that people would end up where they were needed most. That's what he said when he ended up on Syrah. I didn't want to imagine that I ended up here because I was needed, but what if I was? If Rory was awake, he could at least tell us if he followed me and how. I already was attached to this place, to the people here, and I didn't want to lose it even though I'd only just begun to get to know it all. This fragile bubble, as Quill once called it, was already becoming precious to me. I wanted to protect it if I could. Quill and I had our dinner together before we heard from Locke again. Rory was still sedated, but had been moved to Vale's place, which was 2 floors down from where Quill lived. He would have to sleep off the psi fatigue, maybe for a couple of days, just as I had. I didn't envy him that journey. That got us back on the topic of what had happened, and Quill eventually went to call his outside contact. I went out to the terrace for some time alone to think through everything. It had been a chaotic day. Some good, some bad, and some ugly. And some I wasn't sure about yet. Quill eventually came out to join me, bringing me a cup of tea.
Thinking deep thoughts again.
They aren't always that deep. I was thinking the sky is pretty.
It usually is.
You think so? I used to feel like the sky was oppressive. I felt caged in by the biodomes, and I believed that if I could just get off this planet, I'd find some kind of freedom elsewhere. Logically, I was just feeling confined by living with a secret. I wonder how much that influenced my unwillingness to look at the world around me.
So, you mean to say you are thinking deep thoughts and having another existential crisis because you looked up at the sky? Got it.
I am not having an existential crisis.
Do you still think it's oppressive here?
Well, Nyssa has a really different atmosphere than New Albion. And today, for the first time, I realized I had the very real possibility of traveling to and working in the Waste. It might be unremarkable to you, since you had a long journey through there to reach this place, but to me, the Waste seemed further away than Dione sometimes. Have I said thank you for helping me that day?
You have. Enough times that we're getting close to double digits.
I'm grateful that it was you. Not just because you have connections, as Vale puts it, but because you're you. I hope you realize that.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but I'm glad to know you have. I'm also glad that I was the one that found you that night.
Neither of us spoke again after that. We watched the sky and the city lights for a long time. Long enough for me to finish my cup of tea and retrieve another. The last cup of tea took a long, long time to finish. The silence that rested between the two of us was comfortable, warm, and I was glad we could dwell in it for a while without ruminating on the very long and chaotic day. I was pretty relaxed by the time we went back inside, despite it all.
Are you wearing one of his old shirts again, girl?
Quill paused strangely at the bottom of the stairs on his way up to his bed. He watched me spread out my usual blankets and prepare my sleeping place on the sofa. I looked up at him, half expecting him to say something, but he went up without a word, leaving me alone downstairs. And I expected the jumble of emotions to keep me awake long after Quill had gone to bed. But I curled up on his wide, comfortable sofa and watched the flickering lights outside before dropping off in only a few minutes. And it was morning before I even realized.